Well, I think that as this growing body of literature develops over the literary nature of the Book of Mormon, it's going to have to be dealt with, and it will be valuable to us when it does. And that is this: we all recognize that the language of the King James Version of the Bible is used extensively throughout the Book of Mormon. The assumption that I make is that when the Book of Mormon uses similar phrases to the King James language of the Bible, that these passages are based on a language which is similar or identical in their original text. Now, I admit that this assumption is pivotal to my work, but more than that, it's also very difficult and not going to be impossible to prove, simply because we don't have an original text of the Book of Mormon at this time to deal with. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and flip up the first one. I'm going to put some of the scripture references here. If you can't read them, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you the references so that way you can look it up. The first one's in 1 Nephi chapter 5, verse 11 to 1 Nephi chapter 6, verse 6. And actually, we're just going to read 5:11 to 5:14. This deals with Nephi's concept of history in terms of scriptural writings. And he tells us this, and you're going to see as we continue that he's very consistent in this viewpoint. They get the brass plates back, and Lehi goes through and reads them, and Lehi comes back and he tells his family what he found in them. And he covers 4 distinct areas. The first, he says, and we're going to start reading here in verse 11, "He beheld they did contain the 5 books of Moses, which gave an account of the creation of the world, and also of Adam and Eve, who are our first parents, and also a record of the Jews from the beginning, even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, and also the prophecies of the holy prophets from the beginning, even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, and also many prophecies which have been spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. And it came to pass that my father Lehi also found upon the plates of brass a genealogy of his fathers, wherefore he knew that he was a descendant of Joseph, and that Joseph, who was the son of Jacob, who was sold into Egypt, and who was preserved by the hand of the Lord, that he might preserve his father Jacob and all his household from perishing with famine." So now, we're going to notice that there are really 4 main elements that he discusses here. The first one is a creation account. The second one is a record of the people, which is a history, and more particularly a history of the kings and the reign of the people. The third part is a record of the prophecies, or as Nephi calls in his own work, the ministries. And then fourth, we have a genealogy. Now, it's validated, this viewpoint, when Nephi discusses his own writings, which he clearly understands are going to be read as Scripture. All 4 of these parts are not included in the small plates of Nephi. And Nephi states specifically that he's going to choose to include some of these components and not others. Now, let's go ahead and move on. This is 1 Nephi chapter 6, verse 1. And Nephi says this, he says, "And now I, Nephi, do not give the genealogy of my fathers in this part of my record, neither at any time shall I give it after upon these plates which I am writing, for it is given in the record which has been kept by my father, wherefore I do not write it in this work." Let's go ahead. The next one here in 1 Nephi chapter 9, verses 2 to 10:1. And I'm going to skip the 2 verses that are listed there. "And now as I have spoken concerning these plates, behold, they are not the plates upon which I make a full account of the history of my people. For the plates upon which I make a full account of my people, I have given the name of Nephi, wherefore they are called the plates of Nephi after my own name. And these plates are also called the plates of Nephi. Nevertheless, I have received a command of the Lord that I should make these plates for the special purpose that there should be an account engraven of the ministry of my people. Upon the other plates shall be engraven an account of the reign of kings and the wars and contentions of my people. Wherefore these plates are for the more part of the ministry, and the other plates are for the more part of the reign of the kings and the wars and contentions of my people. And now I, Nephi, proceed to give an account upon these plates of my proceedings and my reign and ministry. Wherefore to proceed with mine account, I must speak some of the things of my father and my brother." And then again in 1 Nephi chapter 19, verses 1 to 5. "And it came to pass the Lord commanded me, wherefore I did make plates of war, that I might engrave it upon the record of my people, and upon the plates which I made," and these are the large plates of Nephi, "I did engrave in the record of my father, and also our journeys in the wilderness, and the prophecies of my father, and also many of my own prophecies have I engraven upon them. And I knew not at the time that I made them that I should be commanded of the Lord to make these plates, wherefore the record of my father and the genealogy of his fathers, and the more part of all our proceedings in the wilderness are engraved upon those first plates of which I have spoken. Wherefore the things which transpired before I made these plates are of the truth, more particularly mentioned upon the first plates. And after I made these plates, by way of commandment, I Nephi received a commandment of the ministry of prophecies, the more plain and precious parchment should be written upon these plates, that the things which were written should be kept for the instruction of my people. We should possess the land also for otherwise purposes, which purposes are known of the Lord. And then wherefore I, Nephi, did make a record upon the other plates, which gives an account, or which gives a greater account of wars and contentions and destructions of my people. And then finally in 2 Nephi 5:33, it just goes over that again. If my people desire to know a more particular part of the history of my people, they must search my other plates. Now, if you take a look at this, with the exception of the first item in my list of 4 things, which is the creation account, the other 3 items are discussed a number of times relative to need to include or exclude them in this record. The creation account, I think, is a little different. It's referred to a number of times, and we are told that this narrative was included on the brass plates. That it was also recorded in the writings of the Jaredites on the 24 gold plates found by the people of King Limhi. Nephi does not include it specifically, nor does any other writer in the Book of Mormon. But it is mentioned numerous times. And leaving it at that, the second item in history, Nephi tells us, is recorded for the most part on these larger plates, with some parts including the small plates. Specifically, items that deal with the reign of Nephi, when he says that he wants to include things about his reign. And I'm going to be getting into this quite a bit more in a few minutes, because it has special relevance to the major passages that I'm presenting. The third item is listed as the ministry and revelations of the prophets, and this takes special consideration as the primary purpose of the small plates. This was by direct commandment and revelation, and then finally the fourth item, the genealogy, he tells us consistently that he's not going to include it because it's already contained within the other scriptural records that are available to them. I believe that clearly, at least in the case of large plates, his objective was to make them like unto the engravings which are on the plates of brass. He's kind of following the same pattern. Here, what I think we find is that on the small plates, is pretty particular. The historical pieces of information he's going to provide us will, to some extent, deal with his reign and his ministry. And this is very significant. I think it's also true that Nephi, after his vision that he has very early in his life, he sees his writings as being read alongside the writings which make up the Old Testament. Nephi receives specific revelations to the effect in 1 Nephi 13 and 14, where Nephi is told, quote, "And they must come according to the words which shall be established by the mouth of the Lamb, and the words of the Lamb shall be made known in the records of thy seed, as well as in the records of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, wherefore they shall both be established as one. For there is one God and one shepherd over all the earth." And then a little later he says to John the Revelator, "Behold, ye shall see and write the remainder of these things, yea, and also many things which have been." And then he also refers to the Old Testament that we have as being similar, or like another writings of the brass plates, as you recall. He also says, except that there are not so many. I think this idea that the Book of Mormon writings that Nephi is preparing, that they wouldn't stand in a vacuum, certainly affected its contents. Now, the historical narratives within the books of 1st and 2nd Nephi, I believe then are going to contain elements which deal with these two themes that he discusses, his reign and his ministry, as I pointed out. And my objective here is to show that the narratives presented by Nephi are often rooted in the stories of the Old Testament as found in the brass plates. We can identify specific parallels in the biblical text, which we have to use our traditional Bible to an extent because we don't have a copy of the brass plates. And we can then see that Nephi borrowed extensively, which would only be natural from the text in his possession. Now, by now you're probably wondering why I titled this paper Nephi and Goliath. And my objective here is to show that Nephi, in writing this literary unit that is the story of his encounter with Laban and killing Laban, is actually patterned in a very detailed fashion on the story of David killing Goliath in the Old Testament. And I'm going to start by using the story in the Book of Mormon as a primary source material, along with the King James Version. And I want to show that the form of the story, the language, the events that occur, the fact that these parallels occur in chronological order, I'm going to build a case that there's a great deal of literary reliance between the two texts. And then, when I get done, I want to point out some interesting details in relation to the text that Nephi used, how it's different assuming that he's using the brass plates, different from the traditional text that we have, and how this reflects back in the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Now, my paper here, I've actually got